Welcome to another episode of Coder Conversations. We have Erik Burd returning. How's it been going, Erik?
Doing great.
Yeah, glad to have you back on the show. So yeah, man. Recently, there's been some pretty interesting news. Have you heard about Crowdstrike?
Oh yes, been hearing all the news going on and what's been happening, and sort of reminiscing some of the times when I was doing my own share of software debugging and dealing with blue screens.
Yeah, how does something like that happen?
And what happens with a blue screen of death? That's what's on Linux. There's an equivalent called kernel panic, where the OS just crashes essentially. And the same thing on the Macintosh too. It's where either a device driver or some other program at the kernel level just does something bad and just crashes the operating system. So it's essentially what you're looking at with the blue screen of death. So when I've had in the past, it was usually because of a driver issue or incompatibility, or actually in one case it was actually a Windows bug. Go figure. So it's usually a combination of different things that can cause it. Of course, null pointer exception, which is a classic. If you've ever seen null as a driver, is guaranteed to, crash the OS.
Right.
Yeah. So when you're working at the kernel level and you're working with device driver, it's very different from, let's say, you're writing an application, that just runs on top of the operating system. It's a whole different ballgame because at least if you crash a program, like say you're running like a text editor, let's say, okay, if it crashes, okay, fine, the program shuts down, you can restart it. It doesn't bring the whole system down. But if you do that in kernel mode, you're bringing everything down. So it's something you have to take a lot of responsibility for.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah, I also feel like that's a major failure in their QA department. Like, how does it? Like, did they test it or?
There's going to be a lot of questions. But it's interesting. The more I'm looking at what I've been hearing, it just seems like an absolutely catastrophic process problem, fundamentally. Because typically, what you do is and I've worked with software at different levels where you did your own QA and you put it through its paces, and you would have this sandbox. So you'd have some sort of test environment, and you run your test, whatever it is, you validate it, everything works, it's great, and then you go and deploy it. But there was one company where I worked at where we had to give it to a client who was going to deploy the security software onto hundreds of machines on their network, or if not thousands, and they wanted to do a test on their end. So we would give, here's a potential release, go ahead and test it on your end to make sure everything's okay. So they would take it, they would have their own sandbox on their end, they would test it, and then if everything worked good, okay, we'll go and deploy it. So there's usually a couple levels that go along with that, because that's why typically with larger IT organizations, they'll have some sort of a period where they're testing it just to make sure there are no issues on their end. But apparently this was pushed out and overrode a global setting where you just said, please don't push it. It still got it. So yeah, that's something definitely happened. I'd be very curious to see what happens, at the end. I'd be very curious to see what happens at the post-mortem, but I'm willing to bet that what happened is people got complacent, it got pushed to production, or they were under time pressure or something to bypass this whole thing. And it's like, well, everything's been fine before, and well, guess what? This time it didn't work too well. And subsequently, what happened? I mean, thankfully, it wasn't something like a disgruntled employee, a hacker group, or a scatter doing like a cyber attack or something like that, which could have been any of those three, potentially. So thankfully, but if you really think about it, they could have done a lot of damage with this. If someone really wanted to do something malicious, this could have been really bad.
Right.
Yeah, considering that just a mistake caused this much damage, if somebody was intentionally trying to bring stuff down, it just kind of shows you how vulnerable all of these interconnected systems really are.
Oh yeah, it's scary if you think about it. I mean, if you really imagine and especially for this situation, how easy it was. I mean, look how many systems got offline, particularly for banks, hospitals, airlines, other critical infrastructure, a whole bunch of stuff. And you think about it, this was so easy that you change one configuration and just blew everything up. And that's it really points to some real conversations that we as an industry have to start taking a look at and say, all right, how do we make our systems more resilient to issues like this to prevent these things from cascading the way they did? And it's everything from how we design everything to how our internal process and what could we have done to prevent this. And there's a lot that probably could have been done. There's no question about it. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of talk about that in the coming months for sure, and I think it's good. But I hope it's a good wake-up call. I think it's a good wake-up call because what I've really seen, this is my little soapbox here, because what I've seen for the last 7 years or so, the quality of software that I've seen in general, just overall, the quality I'm seeing just across the board, I'm not picking any particular company, it's just gone downhill. It's just not as good, not as resilient. We're seeing bugs in places where it's like, wait, this was working before. Why is this broken now? And now you add all this stuff that's going on with, move fast and break things mentality, the ease of which we can push to production, where, oh, we just push to the cloud and it goes out. Well, okay. And then you think about how interconnected systems are nowadays, which as you mentioned, Kevin, and plus you think about just the complexity of systems nowadays. They're getting more and more complex, and now we're throwing AI in there on top of it all. That's a nice perfect storm for something like this to happen. And do I expect more of this to happen in the future? Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, the software is getting way more complex. I also feel like, a lot of companies do not really invest in the resources into things like cybersecurity or, just stability for their developers because there's there's a lot of turnover. So if you're bringing in a whole new set of people and they're having to update this extremely complex code base and, there's nobody from there who really knows what everything does, then,
That's right.
You're like you mentioned, you run into a perfect storm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've worked on code bases that were as large as 2.5 million lines of code, which is a pretty large code base. Now, mind you, that number does include the core code, unit tests and other side programs we had and what have you, but still, that's code to go through. And there were a lot of components and nobody could have known everything. It's just impossible. There's so much there and so much subtlety. And if you were there long enough, you had to I was one of the first few developers, so I knew the whole history of everything and I knew how everything interconnected. Well, if you're a new college grad jumping into this, you're like, oh my God, you had no idea where to go. You wouldn't understand.
It's overwhelming. Yeah.
Oh, it would be. Overwhelming. You'd be drinking from a fire hose, and there's no way you can understand the subtleties of why things work and how they interconnect, and it would just take you too long. I mean, I've worked on code bases that would take me about a year to get up to speed, at least. And it's just because, and it's not because the developers weren't capable. It's just so complicated. And to understand how they all work together and how they interconnected, it just takes time. And then now we're seeing a lot of people retiring, they're leaving the field. So all that tribal knowledge is gone. And that's not good.
Yeah, that's really scary. Like if the senior gets axed or they're retiring and you just have a bunch of newer people coming into this massively complex code base and they don't really know what everything does. And these code bases are running critical systems. I feel like that could put a lot of people's lives in danger.
Mm-hmm. Right. And especially I work in medical devices. So I'm looking at this from a medical device standpoint where we're constantly thinking about cybersecurity. In fact, now it's required to actually do a cybersecurity assessment on your software, which is frankly long overdue. And I'm glad the FDA is now requiring it. But it's really, really important because you don't think about how many systems in a hospital are talking over the internet. I mean, you have pacemakers that upload. I mean, what would happen if the pacemakers decide to have a blue screen like this or brick? Then what? That would be worst case scenario, which I really don't want to envision happening. And I know people who've worked on pacemakers and they are absolutely paranoid about changing anything. And they're absolutely fine tuning their code to the point where they are going by hand, tweaking assembly just to optimize the amount of battery time that is used, because they plan for a 5-year battery, because you can't just keep opening someone up every year to replace a battery.
Sure.
So it's a whole different ball game when you're getting into medical devices. So we look at things a lot more critically than your typical software as a service, application.
Right.
Yeah, when lives are being put at risk, you definitely gotta have a higher bar to the quality, because if it doesn't work, people can die.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, you kind of mentioned that the quality of coders is going downhill. What do you think is the cause of that?
Well, it's not just so much quality of coders, but code itself. I've noticed. I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think. I think part of it is quality assurance is often seen as a cost center, and so it's an easy target to cut back on. So let's think of it. You really think about that a little bit. Technical support, same way. It's an easy target. Hey, you're low-hanging fruit, easy to get rid of. I worked at one company where the quality assurance team was just so bad that, like, I was like, you gotta be kidding me. I mean, come on, get some real people in here. I mean, it comes down to you get what you pay for. And unfortunately, for the salaries they were willing to pay, they really did not get good people, and that's to be expected. But of
That's
course, then again,
unfortunate.
also it is really sad. In fact, the QA people were making less than tech support people. It was that bad.
Oh, wow. That's
And I was
bad.
like, you gotta be kidding me. I was like, usually it's the opposite. Usually it's tech support makes the lowest, then QA, then software engineering. Not there. It was
Right.
tech support making more than QA. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, no wonder. But I think fundamentally is they just
Wow.
don't test. They don't teach testing in college at all. I mean, every so-called testing class I've had has been a joke. I mean, I could have taught it better just from my
Yeah.
experience in industry. So really,
Right.
testing is never up in formal education, and typically you learn on the job, which is unfortunate because it's a core discipline. You need to be able to software, make sure it works, and then how to test it. And there's no shortage of unit test frameworks out there. Use it. It's not like the good old
Right.
days. You had to write your own.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, like with increasing complexity of code, if the QA is kind of declining in quality, I think we're in for some potentially disastrous scenarios in the future, especially as like things like cars and more and more of these devices start, utilizing code to operate.
Well, look at all the issues with the self-driving cars we've had. I mean, in fact, I saw a Waymo car do a really weird turn in San Francisco recently. I was like, okay, what's going on here? But look at all the issues they have with self-driving cars, where they've run into poles, they've crashed into other cars, they stop in front of fire trucks, all kinds of random stuff like that. Yeah. I mean, like who's testing this?
Right. Who's testing it? Yeah.
Like, what do you think some realistic steps are to improve the quality of software in the industry?
Oh boy. Well, one is a budget. Let's start with that. As often they just cut corners there. It's an easy place to cut costs. But it's really a lot of it's training. Getting software engineers more involved with testing. In fact, when I started doing software engineering years ago, I did a lot of my own testing. But then again, I kind of had to, so I had to learn from other people.
Sure.
How do you retest it? So it really starts with making the software engineers responsible for doing testing at a very basic level, at least. And especially nowadays, you've got all these automated testing frameworks that can help you out. And there's no excuse for being able to run just some basic sanity tests. And then you have a QA team that is just focused on, okay, you have some people might do back end, some might do front end, whatever components you're working on, and make sure you've got you build up a test you can do a regression test on. So if you have a new build, okay, you just run this test scan, then when you find anything, oh, okay, there you go. You know, maybe we found, okay, maybe we fixed this bug and now it crept back in. Let's see what happened. But yeah, it's just a lot of it's going to be come down to training and just investing in the people to really build out a good team. But it takes time and money. That's the problem.
Time and money. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I kind of feel like companies, they're not really trying to train their employees. It's more so you need to have the skills when you come in the door and just hit the ground running. I haven't really seen too many companies actually like formally invest in an engineer. At most, they might have like a, you know, like a Udemy type of thing, a subscription to Udemy, and just tell you, hey, go take some courses.
Right. Yeah, that's a big thing. That a lot of companies don't invest, you know, in places where they have to, or at least frankly should. And as far as I'm concerned, as a software engineer, as far as it was my own personal responsibility. This is for me. It was my personal responsibility to make sure that whatever I pushed to production or wherever I shipped, that was a part of me. I just took it very seriously. And this is before I went to medical device, but even then, I didn't want to be pushing bad code to production because my first job right out of college was in technical support. So I got to be on the receiving end of why a bug crept in and you get an angry customer yelling at you on the phone. And
Right.
I learned a lot about software engineering those 2 years. I'll tell you right now, I learned a heck of a lot. I was like, okay, don't do this, Eric. Okay. And yeah, it was a process. And at the time, our QA was like, okay, but then we got a professional, a really good guy, a real good QA manager, and he really got us up with standardized test plans, unit testing, and everything else. And our quality just did a 180. It got a lot better and much more reliable.
Can imagine.
Yeah, it was just like night and day. It just got better. The customers were happier. And sure, maybe it cost us some extra money, and every once in a while I would hold up a release, just say, no, this bug has to be fixed, because guess what? First thing the customers are going to say, hey, did they fix that bug I reported back 6 months ago? And first thing I check.
And what do you think the best way to test is? Would you say unit testing or something else?
It really depends on what you're testing. Whether it's a web app or a standalone app, yeah, it really depends what you're testing. I mean, but it really starts. It depends on what you're doing, what's the criticality, because how I would test something in medical devices is going to be very different from a web app.
Sure.
Yeah, it's going to be very different. So I come from the medical device world, so I look at things very differently than someone who does React or some sort of web app application. So that'd be a whole different ballgame. So for us, at least in medical devices, yes, we do have unit testing for the code. We have our other automated tests that we run just to validate all the algorithms. So we have got our own test suite that's already been built up over time, and we run it just to make sure things are working. And if there isn't, okay, we have folks take a look, see what's going on, or maybe it's just some weird off case, or we'll add some more cases here and there. So yeah, so there's always a process for it. So it really depends on what you're working on, but it also has to focus on what's the criticality of this. So the more critical this component, so if this fails, what's the risk involved? And risk is a big thing you have to look at, because we do this all the time in medical devices. We have to evaluate what's the risk of this failing, what's potential, what's the impact, and all this stuff. And yeah, so that's what you got to factor in. But fundamentally, every software engineer should be doing testing at some level, period, because you owe it to yourself as a professional, not to mention society as a whole. You just being able to, hey, you're doing your job, and part of it is you should be doing testing of your code, not just throwing it over the fence. Say, oh, it's QA's job. No, that's your job too.
Yeah.
That attitude has to change.
Yeah, I feel like there needs to be like more clarity in regards to testing, because I feel like a lot of software engineers don't really know the difference between the different kind of testings. Like they don't know what unit testing is versus integration versus end to end. So kind of gets muddled. I think, the education around testing needs to improve. Like, what is a good unit test or test in general?
Right. Yeah. In fact, subject. In fact, there are whole books on it for sure. But yeah,
And
it's
like
really
you
a
were
lot of it's education.
saying, like you were saying, Eric, they don't really teach this stuff in school.
No, they don't. Or if they do, they do a poor job of it. It's one or the other.
And why,
It's
yeah, why is that they're not really teaching it or they're not teaching it properly?
yeah, it's really hard to say. I think it's just one of those things where it's either it's not. God, it's just like it's really not thought about. It's kind of like, well, we bolted on. It's like, oh, it's teach computer science and teach how to write software, but I guess you just don't realize. I just it's either an oversight or it's just not given enough priority or enough really thought about. It's like, hey, wait a minute, we need to test this up too. And I think it just falls through the cracks, and it was unfortunate. Yeah, because it's one of the things I bring up, even with data science, is it's like, especially when they're validating their model, and I'll see them using different data sets and everything, how they interpret it and what there actually is a fair amount of similarity with data science and software engineering, well, to a certain extent anyway. But yeah, but either way, testing is needed there too.
Yeah, for those in the audience who aren't familiar, what is data science? Like, what do they do exactly, and what are some of the industries they affect?
Well, data science itself is a very broad discipline. And that's the thing. And plus, the whole meaning of data science has changed over all the years. But it's just really taking data and providing and doing analysis on it, and then generating some form of insight. That's what it boils down to at the end of the day. Now, in terms of how you do it, okay, yes, there's Excel, you have Tableau, you've got Python, you've got all these other machine learning algorithms that you can throw at your data set to generate whatever analysis you're trying to perform. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you're just trying to figure out, okay, given this data set, how can we maximize our profit, or how can we minimize our costs, or make things more efficient, or whatever it is you're trying to do.
Sure.
But the other part of data science is also the communication aspect. And this is where you're doing visualizations, dashboards, and other stuff like that. Sort of, here's what we found. Here's how you communicate that. And that's a very important aspect that's often overlooked.
Absolutely. So, like, what do you see in terms of careers? Like, is there like more jobs in the near to short term in software engineering or data science?
Well, let's see. There's actually quite a bit in both, I would say. There's definitely a lot of opportunities in data science where you can even just be there's a business analyst. There's plenty of room there, particularly anyone who does SQL, anything with databases. If you know SQL, you're golden. If you know Excel, great. Python, if you know all three, awesome. You can do quite a bit, but you still have to produce. You can't just know the three languages by themselves. You actually produce some projects, at least to help,
Sure.
build out a portfolio on GitHub, where at least do some analysis, some data, and at least try to get yourself out. The problem is it's just a really bad market out there. It's just really hard. And I was trying to help
It's terrible. It's terrible right now.
Yeah, it is. It's horrible. It basically reminds me of when I graduated from undergrad. It just reminds me of it. It was this bad.
Because I was talking to a senior developer the other day, and she had, I don't know, like 10 years of experience, and she can't find a job anywhere. She just keeps applying, and nothing.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah, it's even for seniors, it's pretty bad. It's just right across the board. I think there's just a fundamental, misalignment, just right across the board.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate because there's a lot of very good, talented people that I've seen sitting on the sidelines, and they're good people. And I know lots of good people who are looking at my students. I had a whole class of, just this past spring. If I was on the hiring position, I could hire some analysts. I would be, hi, we got a position here. I would hire them,
right?
Because they did that good of a job. And I was even posting jobs I would find out about. Say, hey, okay, who's interested? Go for it.
That's awesome.
It's unfortunate. I feel like computer science and that kind of thing, that's the future of the country. But if people can't find jobs, then a lot less people domestically are going to start taking those subjects, which means, we as a nation, we can end up getting behind.
Well, it's also what's happening is we're also, in a sense, destroying the pipeline of people getting into those fields. Because if you take a look at all those old systems that have been around for many years, those people are retiring at some point, if you think about it. And then they're gone. Who's going to take over? And I think some companies are starting to realize that now, which is long overdue, because we're seeing people saying, okay, I took this boot camp or something, and then they're trying to find a job for like, a year or so, and then they give up and they go back to something else, which is really unfortunate. But right now, we just got a glut of people out there and very few opportunities.
Yeah, I can also see some of these more senior people that, they end up creating a moat around their job by not really teaching anybody else the code base because,
Mhm.
if companies are laying everybody off, they might be looking to protect themselves. And, if they're the only one that knows the code base, you can't really fire them.
Sure.
Yeah, makes it harder. I know knew one engineer who actually did that. He took that strategy to a pretty hard extreme. In fact, even the components he worked on, he had his own private build server on top of it all. And I was like,
Oh, wow.
really? Well, that's a good one. Where the heck is this? And I had even had one person in senior management ask me, Eric, where's this software coming from? I said, I don't know. It's not coming up from the engineering build server. You better find out. You better talk to him. And it was really one of those situations where, okay, if this guy gets hit by a bus or something happens to him, we're screwed. And I brought that up multiple times. And it's like, yeah, basing on some private server only he controlled, and it's like, yeah, that's not good.
No, not at all.
Like, yeah, I mean that is a huge point that company need to consider, and it's kind of like like coders are almost like car mechanics. Like if you don't know coding, if you don't know programming, you're gonna have to pretty much trust what they tell you. And a lot of these businessmen, they don't know coding, so they're pretty much at the mercy of the software engineers working on their products.
That's right.
So yeah, I think they have to be very careful in how they treat the talent, like just mowing them down, cutting them. That's probably not the way to go.
No, it isn't. And I think that's what's
Right.
really driving a lot of it. And especially when you look at what's been happening since COVID, we're having a big transformation of how work is done now, where people are now saying, hey, you know what? It's okay to leave a toxic work environment. And people are making better work-life decisions. And we're seeing that's accelerating, and especially with Generation
Yeah.
Z, especially with them. Oh yeah, they're seeing they're already seeing what's coming, and they're going to be really driving a lot of this work-life balance. Because what we're seeing, is, especially in this country, we have this whole culture of hustling, overworking, burnout, and they don't want that. And I don't blame them because I've lost track of the number of weekends and late nights I spent, writing software. And yeah, it eventually gets on you. And
Can imagine.
and I can see why they had the Great Resignation, and people are saying, okay, enough is already enough, and we want better work-life balance. It's not that they're lazy or they don't want to do the work; it's just they want to kill themselves because if you get burned out, you're useless. I mean, you can't do anything, and that's not good for anybody. So
Right.
it's in their best interest to make sure that people are rested, that people are taking their PTO, whether it's unlimited they have or not, and just make sure people are relaxed. And if they need some extra time or need some extra help, I can give it to them because that'll pay itself back 10 times over. And the worst is when I've had I've gone to interviews and I've actually asked them, so you got unlimited PTO? Okay, well, how much PTO did you take this past year? And they just look at me with the deer in the headlights look, like, that tells me everything. Thank you. I'd ask, and they just look at it, the vacation? Yeah. That's why I think companies should just have a minimum PTO and be done with it.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think a lot of workers, they're afraid of taking PTO because maybe they feel like the manager's going to ding them in a future review, or maybe they feel like they'll get better marks if they're working nonstop. I think it comes down to the company culture.
Absolutely. I think, do we lose him?
Yeah, I think we lost him. Let's see if he comes back. But yeah, I mean, in the meantime, yeah. So what about your jobs? Did you feel like they had a good work life balance?
No, not at all. I mean, when I was working in programming, there was zero mentorship, and I mean zero. I came into this organization after having interned for maybe 6 to 9 months, and I got hired as a React developer for this one shop. And basically, when I came in, they were just like, oh, well, we can't take the senior developer off of his workload to train you. So
Mm-hmm.
you're just going to have to, train yourself on like free code camp and like different programs on YouTube. It was just very lazy. They were just
Yeah.
looking at the whole thing in a very lazy scope. And I kind of felt cheated. I felt like, oh, this is the industry. This is how the industry really works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, sorry. Yeah, Firefox died on my end here. I had to reboot.
No issue.
Yeah, Firefox croaked. But anyway, but you were mentioning about but when you got back on, there's a lack of training. Because the seniors are so busy, they're just so stressed out, they don't have time to even train anybody. And
Yeah, it's
that's
like
something that's really missing.
the managers are basically saying, okay, well, the senior developer, they need to stay on their workload. There's no
Right.
time, there's no time to train the junior. But then the junior coming in, I mean, like I was throwing this huge code base with
Hmm.
no explanation, no notes, and they just
Right.
expected me to start building out features, which was ridiculous.
Right. You can't do that. Right. It's kind of like what's really needed to help software engineering. Well, as a discipline, it's more of a mentoring, kind of like we do the trades. Where okay, you go to a trade, you
Right.
learn a job, and you actually have people who mentor you and groom you and really help you throughout this whole journey. And that's I think is really needed.
Yeah, I feel like the big problem is everything is catered towards short term profits. Like they're
Oh
not
yeah.
gonna bring in anybody to mentor the junior because they feel like that person can be working on code that is bringing in money. So
Hmm.
eventually you create a situation where there's seniors but no real juniors.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, it also just stresses out the seniors because you figure the seniors are probably already working what 60 hours or so, and then you ask them to train them. Well, okay, so train the juniors, and that takes them away from their work. So now they're working 80 hours by the time you add it up. And it's already been shown that after you work 80 hours in a week, your productivity just falls to the floor. I mean, it's just
Absolutely.
that's already been well known and established for decades. I mean, you get to a certain point where it can't keep sustaining it. I mean, I've had those weeks where, okay, maybe we're looking a long week for initial product launch or something where okay, there's a lot going on, but you can't just keep doing that 80 weeks every single week. That's just not sustainable at all. And unfortunately, many companies operate that way.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree. Without work life balance, you're eventually gonna get burnt out.
Mhm.
So, like,
Yeah.
what do you do to find work life balance in your life?
Well, a lot of it has just been just setting boundaries. But thankfully, I'm in a position where I can do that, which is good. So this allows me to uh, at least I can get my work done, which is great. I managed to get all my work done, which is wonderful. But at least I do have time for myself. I'll do my little side projects, I do my woodworking, and then I got my teaching, of course. And just having a boss who's at least very understanding. He knows just like, oh, cool teaching. That's cool. He thinks it's great. He actually supports it, which is phenomenal.
That's great.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your woodworking hobby?
Well, so woodworking, I actually picked it up. Well, I used to do woodworking many years ago, but then of course during COVID, I figured, well, okay, everybody was doing something, whether it was baking bread or something. Yeah, so I figured, okay, I'll do woodworking. And I just slowly relearned a lot of old skills that I've forgotten over time. And I just was making very simple things, making shelving, something small, something you do. It's easy. a quick win, so to speak, but you're building up your skills. And then gradually over time, I was getting to the point where now I'm building furniture. So, there we go. That's where I'm at now.
Oh
It's
wow,
a lot
yeah,
of
that's
fun.
amazing. Like real world furniture is extremely expensive.
It is. I mean, my wife was that's like, yeah, I wonder why it costs so much. Some of the it's like, yeah. I mean, depending on what you're building, what material and all that, yeah, it's not cheap. And I've done the math on it. I go, yeah, it's cheaper for me to go run over to Berkeley, go to the hardware dealer, buy the wood, and then do all the milling myself, and say, okay, here you go.
Right.
And it's better quality because I ended up making some end tables for my parents, and they had these. Oh God, these things are awful. They bought it someplace. I'm like, it was just quarter-inch crap, plywood with this chipboard garbage in there. I'm like, oh my God, how much was this? Please don't tell me. And it was like $90 for each one. I'm like, are you kidding? So then I
Oh,
go.
wow.
So I said, okay, fine. I'm going to get some ash lumber, which is similar to oak but a lot cheaper. And so I built this up, and I build two tables for them, which are basically bomb proof, and it was much cheaper and better. It'll last for decades. I even built a
Right.
desk. I had built a desk for my mom, which was built based on an old design that was very popular in the U.S., which goes back to 18. It was a typical schoolhouse uh, design, of which was back when a lot of people were farmers back in those days, and they needed to build this fairly fast because hey, we got lots of people. We need to educate them. Hey, we got the single room classrooms like they used to have back in the day. Well,
Right.
it's a very simple design, and I'm like, oh, okay. So here's a go. In fact, I even had one as a kid. So I built one out of ash, and the thing's bomb proof, and it was just a lot cheaper than anything you would find outside, and better quality. And I could just customize it to whatever they needed and whatever dimensions, and hey, it worked great. And it's a lot of fun. You get to do a lot of problem solving, with woodworking. You're dealing with angles, trigonometry, and dealing with wood movement because although the wood is dead, it's not going to grow, but it does absorb humidity from the ambient moisture in the air. So it's going to expand and
Sure.
contract, which is why in the
Right.
winter your doors tend to stick versus in the summer they don't. So that's the same thing that's
Right.
happening there. And of course, you see things that happen with woodworking and trying to accommodate, movement and how things go. It also provides a nice tactile activity because we spend so much of our time putting out ones and zeros out there. It's nice to actually put your hands on something and building things with your hands. So it does exercise the part of
Absolutely.
your brain.
Yeah, so it's important to get away from the computer. I've
Oh
seen a
yeah.
post today on LinkedIn from Brian Pulliam. He said something like, the more he does programming or he's involved with tech, the more he feels like kind of getting away from it. Essentially, something along those lines. But I feel like we're so immersed in technology these days; it's almost like integral to our everyday living. We're almost like slaves to it.
Yeah, that's why when I go on
Seems
vacation, I
that way.
choose places that don't have internet.
Yeah, how is that experience of kind of like fasting from technology?
Oh, it's awesome. It's wonderful. Oh, believe me, it's like, oh, it's easy. Believe me, it's just,
Yeah.
oh, I have no problem with that. Believe me, it's easy. But then again,
Yeah.
I grew up at a time when we didn't have this broadband always on. And you wanted dial up, or you wanted. I mean, the web didn't exist. The internet was, your 300 baud acoustic modem. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like things were different then. So I know what it was like to be disconnected in the first place. So versus nowadays, most people they don't know, they have no idea what that's like, and they're like, "What? Where?" The first
Right.
thing they're looking for is, "Hey, what's the Wi-Fi password?" It's like, really? It's like, real, folks, you can't live without Wi-Fi for a day or two. Okay, it's kind of like cutting off their oxygen.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
me and
great.
Kevin probably grew up with like the 56K modem.
Yeah, That was fast for me.
Yeah.
I go back to 300 baud.
I remember I was in high school and we got a cable modem, and that was right around the time that Napster had come out. So I was just having a lot of fun with that, burning CDs, downloading stuff super, super fast. You know, coming from a 56K modem, cable was like, light years ahead.
Yeah, no question. I was like, whoa, what are you doing? This is amazing.
Yeah.
Yes, I think we're all old enough to have experienced life where, the internet wasn't as dominant, where you didn't grow up with it. I think you feel a lot more liberated when you know people don't have access to you all the time, and they expect you to respond, which is kind of like how it is with all these digital devices. Like, since people can access you instantly, it's like they almost feel you need to respond to them immediately.
Right. Well, especially with our hustle culture we have here in the United States, versus over in Europe, they have a whole different mentality about it. Where you're on vacation, or as they say, holiday, as they put it. Well, when you're on holiday, you're on holiday. Period.
Right.
Yeah.
I kind of also think
thing.
I kind of think it's also interesting, like how back in the day before the internet, people's their idea of life was what they experienced around them, whereas now it's more so like what they're reading on the internet. Like, their ideas are formed more so from being fed from the internet versus just their immediate community.
Right. Yeah, very different. Yeah, because just even growing up, it's what you experienced, growing up. Now it's like, oh, what's on their Facebook feed, or what's on their Instagram, or whatever.
Yeah, Brian and I, we talked about this a lot. Is like, before, I used to see kids like all over the neighborhood, people, a lot of people outside. Now you walk around and it's a ghost town.
Oh yeah. In fact, there was that. I knew there was that meme floating around a while ago. It's like how you knew where everybody was in the neighborhood, and they showed a house with a bunch of bikes in the front yard, and I was like, yeah, that's how it was growing up. Oh, that's so-and-so's house. There you go. You see a pile of bikes there.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, when me and Kevin were growing up, you'd go outside and there'd be like 15 kids on bikes on one block. Then you go another 3 blocks down, you got like 20, 30 kids all playing a basketball game. You go another 3 blocks down, you got kids playing marbles and dominoes, and now everyone's just inside on their cell phone, on their laptop, on their tablet.
Yeah, exactly. It's a whole different ball game now. It's really sad to see that, because I see kids are constantly on their laptops or playing Xbox or whatever. It's like, hey, you got a nice day outside. Let's go out. Like, come on. It's like, what's like, good Lord.
Like, have you noticed, like, with the incoming students, do a lot more of them have like social anxiety because they're not really interacting with each other in person? A lot of them are more so interacting with each other through chat rooms or Messenger.
I don't know. See, I haven't noticed that, but most of the students are pretty well. They interact with each other for the most part. So at least that's what I noticed. But yeah, I'm sure there's also a lot of chat that goes on as well. I mean, it's kind of I think they probably spend more time online, but it's hard to say. Right? But I just based on my experience, a lot of them do interact with each other.
I think one other point in regards to the online thing is that pretty much everything you do online leaves a digital trail that's recorded. So I think students, they have to be a lot more careful these days, because if they do something like when they're 15, post something on Twitter, it could be brought up 10 years later and they can end up losing their job.
Yeah.
Well, there's that old saying, the internet never forgets.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
So going forward, what do you think is important for the younger generation to take away when interacting in this increasingly digital world?
Well, a lot of it just really comes down to be careful with how what you share, what you post online. That's why you're seeing a lot of issue with the sextortion, with the Yahoo boys. Yeah, there was that gang out of Nigeria that was doing extortion scams with teenagers, which is just incredibly scary. Where you got kids who are sexting each other, and then of course these guys get a hold of their pics, and then they blackmail them to the point where yes, kids committing suicide, and that's a real thing going on right there.
Oh wow,
It's just absolutely disturbing.
Yeah, with AI, it's going to be even more, even more of that,
Yeah.
because they don't even have to do the act. You can just take their face and have AI
Uh-huh.
create these scenes and then say, "Oh, that's them."
Right. And that was
right.
something I brought up in my class. We were talking about issues with privacy, security, talking about AI, and a lot of other things that are coming up. And yeah, that's a real thing. And we were seeing with video, audio, and a lot of other things coming down the pipeline. Absolutely, that's a real thing where you take someone's face, you put on some other body, and oh, it's someone else. No, it's not. It's where all these deep fakes come into play.
Yeah.
So now it's going to be making it a lot harder to say, okay, what's real and what's not. It's going to be the old joke: is it real or is it Memorex? That we used to say back in the '80s, reference to Memorex cassette tape. But yeah, that's what we're getting right now. In fact, what's funny when you think about it, remember that movie, The Running Man, with Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. Remember that there's that one scene where they actually make a deep fake where they showed what was Jesse Ventura, he kills Arnold Schwarzenegger in this fake scene. And it's like you think about it, go, oh my God, we thought that was like cutting edge craziness back in the '80s. Here we are now, we're living it.
Right.
And the same with the movie Looker, same thing, which is a horrible movie even by '80s standards, but it actually did bring up you're a digital twin of sorts, and similar like what we're seeing with AI.
Now, what do you think about social media? I know me and Kevin have had previous conversations about how it's really toxic, especially for, let's say, preteen or teenage girls who they're comparing themselves with these Instagram models. They're comparing themselves with these influencers. And these models and these influencers, all their pics are photoshopped. You have these, preteen, teenage girls comparing how they look with these Photoshop versions of models, and you have like a lot of bulimia happening, anorexia, suicide attempts, all kinds of stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, that's a real thing. Well, in fact, in some of those models are probably fake too. They're probably just AI generated just to begin with.
Exactly.
So it's really a bad situation. They should just be off of it for all intents and purposes, really. Especially just for what you mentioned. They're comparing themselves to someone else. It's like, no, you are who you are. You are a unique person. Don't try to be like somebody else.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it's really unfortunate to see how it's degenerated, as bad as it is. I mean, right? The only social media I use is LinkedIn. That's about it.
What's so interesting about all of this technology is that, like, it connects us, but it also makes us more isolated than ever. Especially see this with like the VR headsets, to where like if you ever see somebody with it on, it's like they're completely blocked out from reality. It's like they're in a whole nother dimension. So it's interesting where all this technology is leading us. Like, do you foresee ultimately like all of this stuff as a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's kind of like a double-edged sword. It's funny to see all those folks with the Apple Vision Pro headsets walking around like zombies. It was absolutely hilarious to watch. I mean, you've got all this going on. Why would you want to put a VR headset, look at the ocean, the mountains, and all? We just go there and experience it. It'd be a heck of a lot better, especially here in the Bay Area. I mean, God, you're far from a beach.
It's beautiful.
I mean, come on. You got all these beaches, you got all this wilderness area. I mean, we're fortunate enough to be 30 minutes from the coast for most part. Well, I think this depends where you're at, but for the most part, you can get to the beach and the mountains. Well, at least the local mountains anyway, maybe not Sierras, but anyways, you could get get there reasonably close. And it's
Right,
easy to
and you're
drive.
in San Francisco, right?
Right. Yeah.
Cool.
So, well, for us, yeah, we got it all right here. It's like, why did you put a headset on? I was like, come on, it's crazy. That's what you look like a dork. You're walking around like this. And it's just like when Google Glass came out, same thing. And people are just walking around holes and everything else, and you know, bumping the people. And had there been a hole in the ground, it would have fallen right through it because just weren't paying attention. And I think it's really, at a whole, just really damaging, long term wise. I mean, just in terms of mental and physical health, and just yeah. I mean, there are some uses for VR, definitely. But of course, people have been trying to figure it out for decades. Go figure. There are some good cases for it, particularly with like say you're doing like training in medical schools. That'd be a good place for it for sure, because you could do virtual training for surgery with that, no question. That'd be quite useful. But
It's fascinating.
yeah, it's pretty cool stuff. What you do with like augmented reality. But I mean, for the overall, I think being able to disconnect is probably the best thing that people can do, which is why I like to disconnect, where I can, and that's one of the reasons I do woodworking, because all right, there's no internet there.
Right.
It's just me and my hand tools, so we're good. And there's gardening. I go out do hiking.
Yeah.
Just disconnect and just relax. And same thing with camping. I'll do my backpacking trips as well. And
well, because you remember a time before when everyone was constantly plugged in.
Yeah. I mean, I come from a time where before people weren't plugged in, or if you were plugged in, well, you had money to burn, because back then it was pretty expensive, or it was pretty difficult to get coverage. Versus nowadays, you can just go anywhere, get high-speed internet practically. It's a whole different world now.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly it all changed too. So,
oh yeah. Well, the rate of acceleration of change, the rate of change has just been exponential, practically. Versus, growing up, it was more of a linear. I would say more of a linear curve. Now it's just exponential.
Right.
once AI reaches the singularity, what do you think? What do you kind of see society going then?
I have no idea.
They call it the tipping point, right, Kevin?
Yeah, well, sadly.
Yeah, that'll be a whole nother ball game. So kind of like to pivot into our final subject. So you kind of went from coding to like product/project management. What made you want to transition to that?
Well, for terms of the transition, you got to a certain point where you spent how many years slinging ones and zeros around and writing software. And then you say, okay, what's the next step in your career? Or where would you like to go? And I was taking a look at a couple different areas, where I want to go. And I figured, okay, let's go into project management. So I just started off, managing some smaller projects at work, something small you can work on that's not too complex, but you can manage it and sort of build some little small wins for yourself. And you start developing the skills and learning how to manage a schedule, breaking down a project into different little components, creating what they call work breakdown structure, and just simply breaking a big piece into little pieces and individual parts, and assigning who's responsible for what, figuring out a timeline, working with stakeholders, managing risk, and everything else. So it just takes time and practice. And just gradually, time, then I decided, okay, I'm just going to move away from just writing code on a day-to-day basis and focus more on project management. And for me, it's just been a lot more exciting, because instead of just being seen as someone who just writes code, and in fact, I have had a couple companies where I was seen as, oh, Eric, you just write code. That's all you do. And they never saw the other skills that I had, for data analysis and, and doing other things. So being able to work at other parts of the organization and at different companies, because like where I'm working now, I'm working with teams in clinical, working with data science. I'm working with R&D, of course. I've got legal, with sometimes you work with them, work with marketing. I work with other external vendors or other groups of people who are either locally or in other parts of the world. So yeah, you get to work across other parts of the business. So you're not just in one little silo. You're just seen as someone who just writes code. No, you get to work in different parts of the business, and it's actually
Right.
get to learn a lot from that. And when you're working in that type of environments, you get to really experience, okay, what does it really take to get a product out the door? And trying to coordinate all these little tasks and make sure everything's all lined up, make sure we've got all the testing done, the documentation in place, we got sign-offs from all the different groups, and then it's like, okay, let's go. Then you go live. So it's a bit of a process. So there's a bit of busy work. Maybe I'm not doing all the ones and zeros necessarily, but there's still a lot of challenging work, and it's a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed it, and yeah, there are a
Sure.
few hiccups here and there, like any job, but you know what? I've really enjoyed it. It's been a lot more fun. I'm more engaged. I'm happier. Hey, it's been pretty good.
That's awesome.
Like what are the different kind of skill sets do you need? Like, code you might need to have like that more linear, I think it's the left brain sort of thing. Whereas this, you probably need to be able to be a bit more social, be able to
Yeah.
coordinate between different branches, etc.
Right. Yeah, just probably a little bit more right brain in that regard, but it's a lot of it really comes down to managing by influence. Really, it's really about communication. If I were to nail down the one thing, it'd be communication. Talking with people, because projects and everything that's involved, it's all about people at the end of the day. So you just learn to work with different types of
Sure.
people,
Sure.
and we have to work your emotional intelligence. Because at one time my EQ, as it's often called, wasn't very good. I'll be honest with you, there it was not. And I had to work on it, but it's a skill. You can pick it up. You can learn. It just takes practice and time. And gradually, as you get a better emotional intelligence, yeah, it definitely will help. And you learn how to influence, how to communicate, and that's really a big part of what I do. Just make sure people are on the same page, and make sure you're able to communicate. Okay, here's the project that we're trying to do. Here's the goals. Here's the you try to get buy-in, and that's a big deal. And it's being able to make sure everyone knows what their role is, what's expected of them. Here's a schedule. Everything's upfront about it. And as things come up, okay, you don't get angry, you don't go crazy. You just deal with it calmly, and then just we'll fix it, move on. You don't go yelling at people. That's one thing you don't do. As I've seen some product managers do that, and that's guaranteed the destroy your career right there, because no one will want to work with you, guaranteed.
Right.
Yeah, but you really are working with people. They don't report to you. In fact, it's about how to get results without authority. If you really think about that. In fact, there's a book called that. In fact, it's called Results Without Authority. What's the guy's name? See, I got the book here. It's Tom Kendrick. Results Without Authority. That's the name of it. It's actually a pretty good book on how you can sort of manage a project, even though they don't report to you, but there are ways you can get results from people. It's just
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, but really a lot of it's just really just working with people, and it's a skill. It takes time. It took me a while, I'll admit it, especially when my emotional intelligence was not the best, but I just had to build it up, do a better job. And I learned from other people, and I started asking around. I was like, hey, how do you do this? What's a suggestion? Started talking to other product managers and asking what they do, what's their approaches, and just learn. And you don't necessarily have to go through that project management professional certification. Some places like you to have that, but frankly, it's just checkbox fodder.
Right.
So for somebody to really excel, they need to really work on their people skills. I know, like the most I'm not gonna say most, but many software engineers are introverted. They just kind of want to get their job done. If they want to transition to something like that, what do they need to work on, and how can they become more social, for example?
Well, a lot of it's just really, it really depends on each person, but it's really a lot of it's just learning how to communicate to people. They really have to learn how to talk to people, how to be succinct, how to frame things. Because let's be honest, a lot of us tend to be a bit of a blunt instrument, and there are times where yes, I am a blunt instrument, but sometimes you have to take a step back and say, okay, how do you frame this in a nice way so you don't come across as being abrasive like 60 grit sandpaper. So it's really about a lot of this how you approach it, and that's a skill. It just takes time to really learn it. And yeah, it's just you're right, Kevin, that a lot of software engineers really can be abrasive because they're just not used to working with you. But it really depends on the personality as well. And if they're willing to put the work in and learn how to communicate, that's what it really takes. But it really takes it from them to actually say, okay, how to really work with people.
Absolutely. I think that's all the questions I had. Did you have any other question, Brian?
I guess just to bring it back around to the beginning with the CrowdStrike failure, what do you think could have been done to prevent this situation?
Well, without really knowing what was going on, internally, at the very least, now I'm assuming they have something in place or a CrowdStrike where they test this stuff. But given how bad this was, at the very least, you got to do some. I'm just really surprised that this happened. I mean, clearly this wasn't tested. I mean, if someone tells me, "Oh yeah, they did testing," I'm like, I know what you did, because I don't see how that could be possible. But really, it's just what I mentioned a little bit earlier, where I talked about sandboxing, where you do a test environment, you make sure everything's working, and then once you've done your part, let's say CrowdStrike does their part. Okay, they want to deploy it to some multinational company. Okay, so you send it to the company. They in turn do their own validation to make sure that, hey, is this working with our environment? Just so it's sandbox and make sure, okay, they verify on their end. And if they do find, let's say CrowdStrike sent them this and they found, hey, this causes a blue screen. Oh, they can send it back to them, and then they can say, oh, wait, let's make a fix. And then this way it doesn't get deployed and take down thousands of computers.
Exactly.
Especially these are companies that are spending millions of dollars a year for the software. They demand better than this. And then we're not talking about grandma's old PC that was being affected. We're talking big companies with massive amounts of systems out there that depend on
right, like the airlines going down, for instance.
Right, exactly. Oh, the airline, well, except for Southwest, because they're using Windows 3.1. Go figure. Which is funny when you talk. It's hilarious, but it actually shows you how many old systems are out there in the wild. I mean, a lot of the software that's being run out there is decades old. Not everything is brand new. A lot of companies are still using mainframes. In fact, I saw some months ago, State Farm was looking for internships for their company, and just so happened they mentioned, oh yeah, must know JCL. That's job control language. That's a mainframe language from the 70s, if not the 60s, or something like that.
Wow.
They don't teach that in school. So it's like,
needless to say, yeah.
Yeah, like JCL. Okay, good luck. I know what that is, but yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of old stuff out there. Not everything is brand new. So in fact, there's a multi-billion-dollar industry just based on supporting legacy code like that.
Right.
So yeah, it's but there's quite. I mean, in terms of getting back to the question as far as what could have been done, yeah, definitely just some basic testing would have found this issue. At least from my perspective, based on what I've read so far.
That's what it seems like. Yeah, just some basic unit test or something.
Yeah, something. I mean, a basic SAN test could have caught this. But then again, until they get the full post-mortem as far as what really went on, which I'm very curious to see what happened, just for my own curiosity, because this cannot happen, honestly, especially for what they're trying to do.
Like medical devices went down. Oh, God. Right?
Jeez. Yeah, well, I don't know if medical devices went down, but at least but systems that hospitals rely on went down. That's for sure.
Right. I read somewhere that surgeries that were scheduled were deleted or canceled out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a different thing. I'd be more worried if it was an actual medical device or something like that. That would be much more
That'd be way worse.
So, yeah, that'd be a lot worse. If it's
That'd
simply
be a lot
okay,
worse.
if it's just their operations, that's one thing. That's it's bad, but as long as it doesn't, someone doesn't die from it, that's my mind this whole time. I was saying, oh my God,
Yeah.
please no one die. Because I'm looking at it from a medical device lens, of course, because that's what I do.
Sure.
But really, it's a lot of things could have been done just from the basic testing on their end, maybe testing on the client's end. But there's a lot that could have been done. But if I was Crowdstrike and also their competitors, for that matter, I'd be doing a top to bottom review of everything to make sure that this doesn't happen. It just everything from the process, from the initial code to the unit tests to the approval, and I would have a full down top to bottom review, because right now there's no excuse in this day and age where you don't have something in place to say, all right, you do a code check-in. Okay, have you at least run some unit tests on it? Has it done some validation? Have you put it through a static code analyzer, a linter, or tools to make sure that, okay, you're not putting in something, maybe some other checks you put in there for certain rules or for your company, whatever coding standards, because there are systems you can put in place where if this code doesn't follow our coding standard, it gets spit back out, which you should do. But of course, it takes a while to get to that point. But yeah, some companies do. But yeah, there's quite a bit you can do just to prevent these things from happening. But ultimately, at the end of the day, these have to be followed, and somebody's got to enforce that.
So someone somewhere along the line really dropped the ball. It sounds like.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, something happened, whatever it is. I'd be very curious, because for something like this to happen is a little disconcerting, and frankly, I think everybody in the software industry should be really paying attention to this, because it's
scary.
It is scary. Oh, it's really scary, because if this can happen with a simple configuration, effectively. This wasn't the driver or anything like that. They just push configuration and kaboom, and thinking, what else is this? It really makes you think, and it's a serious situation. But this, again, coming back to when we were talking about software quality, well, it's also about process and how you put that in there too. So that's another aspect of things. So you can actually test it, but is it good testing? Is it valid? Is it repeatable? Can you at least make sure, are you doing the right type of testing, for that matter? Because you can run a bunch of tests, but okay, are you testing the actual behavior that you're expecting? Well, no. Well,
sure.
Because I've had a lot of QA teams do that, where they're just running through cycles. Oh, we're running these tests. That's great. Did it test this? No. Well, what good is it? Come on. We need operations. So there's multiple layers of tests that need to be done, and that can be done on their end, plus also on the corporate end. But then again, you also need the time, the budget, and the staffing to do that. And guess what? They cut back all their budgets, or less people. They don't have time to do it, so it gets deployed anyway. And then
they're cutting corners, basically.
Right. Yeah. They're penny wise, dollar foolish, and there are some places where you just cannot afford to cut back. And well, here we are.
Especially, in something like cybersecurity.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's going to get a lot more budget. I mean, in fact, you see those memes where you see, okay, here's an empty jar showing, here's the budget before a cyber attack, and then they show a jar full of coins saying, oh, the budget after a cyber attack. Yeah, it's about the truth. And you're going to see a lot more of that. Definitely. So let's say, hopefully people are getting the memo that this is important, and especially now with AI and more interconnected devices and everything. So we need to really be on top of things. And again,
absolutely,
it comes down to short-term thinking, and hey, let's make those analysts in New York happy, but at the same time you're getting short-term profits, which is great for now, but down the road you're just setting yourself up for failure.
And that's exactly what you said. You hit it on the head there. Short-term profits. I think that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, short-term thinking. Well, which is unfortunate, because you have to play the long game on these projects.
Absolutely.
And QA is an investment. If you have good high quality software, guess what? People are gonna go for it. They're gonna be much happier. I mean, look at stuff we're seeing nowadays. It's like, oh my God, really not good. So yeah, there's gonna be it'll be interesting to see what happens in the coming months. But I will say that for everybody listening, do be kind to your IT staff, especially now, because I'm sure they've had a very long weekend, or probably going to be having a few long weeks coming, depending on if you're affected or not. But yeah, they're the unsung heroes of making sure the system's up and running. I was a system administrator in a previous life, and I can tell you it's not a pleasant one. I'm glad I'm not there. It's a thankless job, but your job is to keep things running, and that's what it comes down to.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Did you have any closing thoughts, Eric?
Well, let's see. Well, it's here. What first Crowdstrike? We got woodworking. Did quite a bit there. Yeah, but it's been. I think just covered what we wanted to cover for tonight. So this is great. I'm just glad to be back on the show. It's been a while, and hopefully I could circle back with some other discussion of some other topics, perhaps, and probably talk a little bit more about some of my teaching later on. That'd be pretty good.
Yeah, we definitely want to have you back. We appreciate you for coming back on.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's been fun.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll catch y'all next time.
See you later.